So as Shelby said, I have been graciously invited here today to teach on the patience of Christ. It is the fourth part in our series about the fruits of the Spirit in Christ, as laid out in Galatians 5, chapter 5, verses 22 to 23. So far we have looked at love, joy, peace, and today, as I said, will be patience. And then in the following weeks, we'll go on to look at kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Don't worry if you've missed any of the other teachings in the series so far. You can always catch up online. It's not like seeing the sequel before you see the original. Each teaching stands on its own as well as being a nice companion to the others. So you can always go to lhim.org and see any teaching that you've missed. Okay, so before we dive into the scriptures to look at some of the many examples in which Jesus showed patience, let's make sure we have a good answer to the question, what is patience? And for that, we look to the dictionary. Does anyone else remember having a dictionary in the house, like an actual print? Yes. We're all showing our age. I remember we only used it for like Scrabble, right? When you played Scrabble, you'd make sure, hey, you're playing fake words. I'm looking it up in the dictionary. But now all you got to do, go to dictionary.com and everything's right there at your fingertips. So, all right, so patience is the quality of being patient as the bearing of provocation, annoyance, misfortune, or pain without complaint, loss of temper, irritation, or the like. Whew. That's a lot. That's a lot to unpack. So I always kind of thought of being patient as just, like waiting quietly, as in like if you're in a doctor's office, you're patiently waiting. You're even called a patient, right? Like when you're at the doctor. So maybe that's what it means. But look at this. It's actually so much more than just waiting. It means withstanding being provoked, annoyed, having bad luck, suffering pain. And as if that's not enough, just going through that, it also means withstanding those things without complaining, losing your temper, getting irritated, or the like. So being patient really requires, maturity on our part, and the ability to handle things when they don't go our way. But not everyone has those skills, right? We've all, unfortunately, probably known someone that flies off the handle with any minor inconvenience, maybe a coworker or a peer at school. They're somebody that everyone has to kind of walk on eggshells around, like, ooh, don't set them off. They have a short fuse. And dealing with them requires even more patience on our part because if we react like they do, things could escalate pretty quickly, right? They go up here, then you're up here, and then, before you know it, things are out of hand. So we don't behave that way, right? We're called to be peacemakers. So even when those around us are being impatient and causing all sorts of friction, we don't react in kind. No, as believers, we are called to withstand being annoyed or provoked with grace. So the second definition of patience is an ability or willingness to suppress restlessness or annoyance when confronted with delay. Oh, this is a good one. Is this convicting anyone else in the room? Okay, I see some hands. Honesty, I like it. I know when I go to the dentist and I get there right on time and I'm waiting to be called back, sometimes it gets a little hard to be patient, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I left work early, I rushed to get here, I'm here, now it's 4:02, my appointment was at 4 o'clock, what's going on? Like, why aren't they calling me back? Like, I've got places to be after this, I got to get home and dinner and, kids, whatever. But we have to remind ourselves, delays are inevitable, right? So there may have been an emergency. Somebody may have had to go home sick or go home to a sick child. So in those moments, we have to take a deep breath and maybe play a game on our phone or, remind ourselves, they know I'm here. And, they're likely working diligently to call you back as soon as they can. So you're practicing being patient, withstanding the delay with grace, and then what happens? They call someone else's name, and that person got there after you. Oh boy, now it's like, woo, I need some next level patience now. what's going on? I was here first. This is outrageous. But, we, and I don't think most of us react this way, but, some people do. But, we have a higher calling. Maybe you're getting a cleaning and that person's getting a crown. It's a different person taking care of you. So if you're just getting a cleaning, you should wait patiently. You don't want Terry to come out and rage clean your teeth because you were impatient. That's not going to be very comfortable. So, maybe next time your name will get called. I've walked into offices and they took me back right away, and I'm like, ooh, there's all these people waiting here. Like, how, why am I going first? But that's just life. So we're called to be patient. So we have to remind ourselves of these things when it's tempting to, complain and get all, upset. So no, we are called to walk by the Spirit, and being patient is one of the fruits of the Spirit, as I said, that's laid out in Galatians 5. And the third definition of patience is quiet, steady perseverance, even-tempered care, diligence. I like this definition also because, being patient means to just keep plugging along, weathering the storm, kind of keeping the ship steady, taking the slings and arrows as they come. Not making a fuss, but to be steadfast and just stay diligent to the task at hand, whatever that may be. And then some synonyms here. There's some SAT words for the high school age kids in the room. Write those down. Indefatigability, I love that. Assiduity, persistence. All right. So, patience is a virtue. Has anyone ever heard this saying? Okay. Yeah. My mom used to say this all the time. I grew up. She's like, patience is a virtue, because, as a kid, most kids aren't very patient. They just want to do whatever they want to do. And so, for instance, as a kid, I hated going on errands, right? If we had to stop and get gas or go to the bank, or the most dreaded, errand of all, shopping, getting dragged around the store, the department store, whatever it may be, my mom would say, patience is a virtue. Now, I didn't really know what that meant, and I have to admit, I kind of get it now, but I still don't really know. So let's just take a quick look at where this phrase came from, because I even find myself repeating it to my kids when they get antsy. So, circle of life, I guess. So this phrase actually goes back to the early 5th century, or the 400s. So people have been saying this to their kids for a long time. It gained popularity in the Middle Ages and became a common proverb in English by the 14th century, which is Middle Ages. The phrase is first found in a 5th century Christian poem called Psychomachia, which is Latin for battle of the soul or war of the soul. And in this poem, virtues and vices are personified as characters. So there's hope, sobriety, chastity, humility, faith, and patience are some of the virtuous characters. And then some of the personified vices are pride, wrath, lust, paganism, avarice, which is greed, indulgence, and idolatry. In the poem, Patience enrages Wrath, who attacks Patience but cannot defeat or injure her. Wrath is driven mad with frustration and ultimately kills herself instead. Approximately 600 years after that poem was originally written, a few manuscripts of Psychomachia were produced in England in the 10th and 11th centuries, and these manuscripts were preserved by a man named Sir Robert Cotton, who lived in the late 16th and into the early 17th century, and he put together a massive collection of ancient works. These manuscripts of the Psychomachia have since been digitized to preserve for centuries to come, and are actually thought of as some of the first known comic books. So as you see here, like comic books we know today, they feature action-packed sequences in bordered frames, frequently accompanied by captions to summarize the often fast-paced plotline. So you can see here, as I described, Wrath is trying to get to Patience, trying to crack her over the head there with a sword, and actually the sword breaks in two, and Patience easily deflects Wrath's sword. So the only thing missing from this to look like a comic book is one of those kapow, exclamations like they had in the Batman comics. So there you go. That's what it should look like. So now you may be asking, well, why is he talking about an ancient comic book? Good question. Because as I read about this poem, it made me realize there is a polar relationship between patience and wrath, or anger, as we would call it today. And as we saw in the dictionary, patience is the ability to bear provocation, annoyance, misfortune, or pain without complaint, loss of temper, irritation, or the like. In other words, patience is staying calm and not complaining or getting angry or losing your cool when provoked, annoyed, or suffering pain or misfortune. So we can think of patience and anger as kind of a spectrum. And the more angry you get, the less patient you're being, and conversely, the more patient you are, the less angry you're being. So now we've established patience as a virtue. It's the opposite of anger, and that it's one of the fruits of the Spirit. But what are some examples of patience in action? Fortunately, we have the Gospels where there are numerous examples of Jesus demonstrating the fruits of the Spirit. So let's look at some places where he showed patience, shall we? All right, we will begin in Matthew 14, starting in verse 25. I have it here on the screen. This is in the heart of Jesus' ministry on earth. And at this point, the disciples have witnessed Jesus give many, many teachings, including the Sermon on the Mount, several parables, as well as perform miracles of healing, casting out demons, and even calming a storm in Matthew 8. Now, in the interest of time, we're not going to look at where he calmed the storm in Matthew 8, but just recall in that record, Jesus and his disciples were in a boat, on the Sea of Galilee, and while they were out on the open water, suddenly a sudden storm forms, and it causes the boat to just be swamped by waves. The disciples are terrified, and they wake Jesus, who is asleep in the boat, and they plead for him to save them. Jesus reproves them for their lack of faith and then commands the winds and waves to calm down. And miraculously, the storm ceases, leaving the disciples in awe of Jesus' authority over nature. So just keep that record in mind as we look here at Matthew 14. This is where Jesus is about to walk on water. So we'll pick it up in verse 25. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. Verse 27, but immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." So he's already being patient with them. He could have responded by getting annoyed and yelling at them, "What is wrong with you guys? How many miracles do I have to do before you realize that you're with me and this is what I do?" But no, he doesn't do that. He spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." So he's really more concerned about their well-being than his own. He's thinking about them not being afraid, and he's showing a lot of patience. He's not getting annoyed. He's not losing his temper. That's patience. So continuing in verse 28, and Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. Verse 30, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Verse 31, Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Now again, Jesus really could have gotten impatient with Peter here, right? Like I said, this is on the heels of Jesus calming another storm earlier in the book of Matthew. And this is almost the same exact situation, right? It would have been understandable for Jesus to lose his patience with Peter. to like grab him by the shoulders. Don't you get it? I'm the Son of God. You're not drowning with me. You saw me calm a storm that other time. What's wrong with you? Are you, like you've seen me give sight to the blind. You've seen me make the lame walk. You've seen me cleanse the lepers. You've seen me make the deaf hear. You've even seen me raise people from the dead. And you still think I'm going to let you drown. But no, he didn't say any of that. Jesus showed patience as Peter struggled with doubt, and he recognized that. So now we're going to take a look at the Gospel of Mark. I have it here on the screen, and in chapter 9, verse 33, Jesus and the disciples end up at a house in Capernaum. Now, to give you an idea of where Capernaum is, it's about 20 miles from Nazareth. So Nazareth is here, and Capernaum is here. So Nazareth is where Jesus is from. Capernaum is here, and this body of water, this is the Sea of Galilee, where the calming of the storm and the walking on the water happen. So because Capernaum is where Peter lived, and it's right there on the Sea of Galilee where many of these events took place, so we think Jesus was probably staying at Peter's house during this time. So anyway, in verse 33, it says, "And they came to Capernaum, and when he asked them, 'What were you discussing on the way?' But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest." So I kind of had to chuckle at this because this is pretty childish, right? Jesus asked, "Hey, what were you guys talking about?" And they all just like, "What were you talking about? I don't know. I didn't hear anything." So that's kind of like admitting that they're guilty right there. Anyone ever ask their kids a question and it just gets dead silent? Did you take the cookie from the cookie jar? I don't know. So the silence is deafening, and but it shows that they're ashamed and they don't want Jesus to know, but he already knows. He gave them a chance to come clean, but they didn't want to admit it. And the reason why they were having this discussion is because in their society, there was really a lot of importance placed on honor and hierarchy, like where you stood in society. So looking at it from their eyes, I suppose you could kind of see, where they were coming from. But Jesus expects more from his disciples, right? He's been working with them now about how they should live and what the Christian way to live is. And so he goes on to correct them. In verse 35, it says, "And he sat down and called the 12 and read them the riot act, loudly berating them for their behavior." No, wait, yours doesn't say that? Okay, no. This is how people in the world would react, right? They would, get all mad and start flailing their arms. But no, Jesus didn't react that way. He could have gotten impatient and annoyed and really rebuked them, let them have it. But Jesus takes a different route. He remains calm, patient, and he uses this situation as more of a teachable moment. So what it actually says in verse 35 is, "And he sat down and called the 12, and he said to them, 'If anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all.' And he took a child and put him in the midst of them. And taking him in his arms, he said to them, 'Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me.'" So Jesus didn't lose his temper. He didn't complain. He didn't get annoyed by the pettiness of the disciples. Instead, he patiently explains that being one of his followers means taking care of the most lowly, which is how children were seen in that society. And he teaches them to adopt a spirit of humility, service, valuing even the most overlooked or vulnerable individuals in society. So you got to remember this whole concept just flies right in the face of the thinking at the time, of all the social, religious, cultural norms of the time. That's not how people thought. This was revolutionary. Christianity, that's what it is. It was a revolution, still is. So not only did Jesus preach radical ideas like love for enemies, forgiveness over retaliation, but here he is teaching humility over status, which turns, like I said, turns the traditional ideas of power and influence upside down. He taught that God's kingdom was open to the poor, sinners, and outcasts, which defies the rigid hierarchy of Jewish society at that time. So you can imagine, like, teaching radical concepts like this did take time, and yes, patience. People weren't going to pick it up on the first time. That's really what teaching is. When a lot of young people in school, you probably know, you go to school, you learn about something all year, and then you go back the next year, and what do you learn? We learned this last year. What are we doing? But that's how people learn. Repetition. Jesus, he recognized that these concepts would be difficult for people to grasp. So he used different, not only repetition, but he used different methods. He used, approaches like teaching in parables and using real life situations like this one as opportunities to get God's message across. So now we're going to look at Matthew 26. You can navigate there in your Bible or just follow along on the screen. And we'll start in verse 36. Now this is after the Last Supper, where Jesus is praying in the garden at Gethsemane. And he's quite aware and troubled by the events that will soon unfold, which he knows will ultimately lead to his torture, crucifixion, and death. So in Matthew 26, verse 36, it says, "Then Jesus went with him to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, 'My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me.'" Now this strikes me as a very human response. It's a good reminder for us that even though Jesus is the Son of God, he was a human being, right? He experienced all the emotions that we do. In verse 38, it says, his soul is sorrowful and troubled. That means he's sad, distressed, very anxious and worried about what's going to happen, because he knows. In verse 39, it says, "And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, 'My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will.' And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, 'So could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak.'" So Jesus, not long before this, had poured out his soul to his friends. He confided in them, saying, I'm very sorrowful and troubled, even to death. And he has one, seems like a minor request, just to stay up with him. If you don't know much about men in general, we don't really discuss our feelings or communicate them very well. So if a friend of mine came to me and said he was really upset and asked me to stay with him, I would know that he is going through something really serious. And as an outsider looking in, it really doesn't seem like too much to ask, to keep your friend company and stay awake with him when he's going to be tortured and put to death. But so I think, not to pass judgment on them, that's not our job, but I think it's safe to say even though Jesus had shared with them and, told them what's going to happen and laid out the events that need to happen for God's plan to be brought to pass, I don't think they really grasped the gravity of the situation, like the sheer, just the moment. I don't think they grasped the moment. So even after Jesus' friends have let him down, falling asleep in his hour of need, he doesn't get angry. He stays patient. He could have gone on to really shame them. Come on, guys, you couldn't stay awake with me for 1 hour? Like 1 hour, But he doesn't. He doesn't do that. He simply admonishes them. He actually admonishes them to pray that they don't become tempted, because the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So even he's distressed, he's sorrowful, he's thinking about what's about to happen, and he's still looking out for them. Continuing in verse 42, it says, again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass until I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. Verse 45, then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." So now he's patiently being patient. I mean, again, they fell asleep on him. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. 3 times they fall asleep on him after he asked them to stay up with him. It's just unbelievable. So, but in that moment, Jesus is patient with them. He knows that they're human, and humans are subject to frailty, weakness, exhaustion. And again, thinking not of himself, but thinking of his disciples, he warns them to be careful because the flesh is weak. In verse 42, it says, is it 42? Verse 45, it says, the hour is at hand. He sees his betrayer, Judas, and realizes time is up, and tells him, you'll have time to sleep later. The hour is at hand means this is the moment that everything in his ministry have been leading up to. This is what Jesus has foretold about his betrayal, suffering, and death. This is when it, it's all kind of set, rolling into motion. So again, he easily could have gone ballistic on the disciples. He could have rebuked them for letting him down in his greatest hour of need, but he remained patient, even in the face of unspeakable fate. I mean, can any of us really imagine what it would be like to be, first of all, unlawfully arrested, for not really doing anything wrong, and then to be tortured, mocked, spit on, denied, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and then crucified on a cross as a common sinner? I don't think, none of us can, we know the story, but can we really comprehend that? I mean, that's just unthinkable that our Savior went through that for us. So, this is a really great example of patience. And we're going to look at another record now, which really rivals this one as one of the greatest examples of Jesus showing patience with the disciples, and more specifically Peter. So let's look at Luke 22. Now these verses take place shortly after the arrest and betrayal of Jesus that we just read about. At this point, Jesus has been betrayed, arrested, and is in the custody of the soldiers, and he's being led to the council of chief priests and scribes to stand before them and be interrogated. So we'll pick it up in verse 56 of Luke 22, which says, "Then a servant girl, seeing him," Peter, "as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, 'This man also was with him,'" meaning Jesus. But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour still, another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter, and Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he, Peter, went out and wept bitterly. Now just think about this for a moment. Your best friend in the world, denies you not once, not twice, 3 times. 3 times. He said, I don't even know that guy. Never heard of him. I mean, that would make anyone feel just upset, betrayed, and he's going through the worst moment of his life up till then. So most of us would just feel terrible, but Jesus, he patiently withstood Peter's undoubtedly hurtful denial of him. He was patient as the soldiers seized him and led him away, right? He didn't have to let them do that. He's the Son of God. He could have, broke away, but he knew this has to happen. And he patiently accepted his fate of the cross because that's what God's plan is to redeem mankind. He could have argued and said, Peter's lying. Of course he's with me. Could have made a big scene. That's what people do, right? You see the videos online, people you just flip through your phone. Oh, here's a fight that happened at Walmart, like this is what the world does. They get in fights or they provoke fights so they can post it online and get clicks and likes but so he easily could have done that. The world says if someone betrays you, you get them back. You get revenge. Don't get mad, get even, right? But not Jesus. The fruits of the Spirit were abundant in him. He was obedient to God's plan. He knew the crucifixion had to come to pass. He asked God if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me, but he also knew that probably wasn't going to happen. He was going to have to go through it. And he showed patience in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Recall what we looked at, the definition of patience is. It's the bearing of provocation, annoyance, misfortune, or pain without complaint, loss of temper, or irritation. I mean, right here, Jesus embodies the definition of patience. In this moment where anyone would totally understand him losing his temper, getting irritated, complaining, but he doesn't. He even goes on after he rises from the dead to restore Peter, which is really beautiful. I don't have the exact verse here, but later on after the resurrection, he restores Peter by asking him he asks Peter 3 times, do you love me? And each time he says, yes. And Jesus asks again, do you love me? Yes. Do you love me? Yes. So if you think about it, this is Jesus' way of kind of canceling out like it never happened, the Peter's denial of him and forgiving Peter for denying him in that moment. So, talk about patience. He withstood his friends letting him down over and over and over again. He probably just felt like this just keeps happening. It's happening over and over again. Has anyone ever felt like they're reliving the same bad day over and over? Like this was the worst day. But, we've all had bad days, and sometimes it feels like you go to work, you go to school. It's like, man, this is the same stuff, different day. You got to keep on keeping on. You got to be patient. It reminds me of a movie that I love, which, considering the day today, has anyone ever seen the movie Groundhog Day? If you haven't seen it, that's essentially the plot of the movie. It's about this cynical weatherman, played by Bill Murray, who is reliving the same day over and over. He's reliving Groundhog Day. And at first, he takes advantage of this fact to manipulate everything to his own gain. Every situation is for him. He's like, oh, I'm reliving the same day. I'll just, kind of manipulate everything so I get my way. And it's only when he learns to be selfless, compassionate, and patient with others does the time loop break and he can move forward having matured and experiencing some personal growth. If you've never seen it, it's a nice little lighthearted movie. Has some really funny parts. And it plays on that feeling we all get sometimes that every day seems to be just like the last, but we have to show patience. And I digress, but I just had to mention it because, as you know, if you're here in the room or watching live, today is February 2nd, which is Groundhog Day. If you're watching this from afar, I apologize. But allow me to explain. See, so if you're in the Philippines, it's already February 3rd, right? It's Monday. But Groundhog Day is a silly little holiday we celebrate here in the United States and Canada, where a groundhog, which is a large rodent, essentially sometimes called a woodchuck, is brought in front of a crowd and asked if it saw its shadow. In case you're wondering, this is probably the most famous groundhog pictured on this slide, Punxsutawney Phil. And for reference, he's the only one in the photo not wearing a top hat. He's right there in that man's arms. They get really decked out for Groundhog Day in Punxsutawney, which is in Pennsylvania, about 6 hours southwest of here. So the legend goes that the groundhog sees a shadow. We're going to have 6 more weeks of winter, and if he doesn't, we will have an early spring. So does anyone here if the groundhog saw its shadow this morning? Well, I'm sorry to report he did see a shadow, and it will be 6 more weeks of winter. So. But he's not a very good weatherman anyway, so take heart. Again, it's a silly little holiday with a completely unscientific way of predicting the weather, but it brings people together and gets us excited about the prospect of winter being over soon. So, but it's a good way of being patient because we have to patiently wait for spring, and and really a reminder to kind of enjoy the season that we're in, whether it's the season of the calendar or the season of our life. Not to rush things, not to just go through the motions. If you have seen the movie or if you do ever watch it, it's in the beginning the main character is just kind of. He's very cynical and everything. Everyone he interacts with, he's like, ugh, I'm better than this. He just oozes, superiority over everyone, and that's kind of a sad way to go through life, let's not be that way. And the movie does go on, like he does have some personal redemption, and actually, once he starts to care about people and actually, care about those around him and engage those, that's when he stops reliving the same day. But so before we close, I'd like to go over a few everyday ways we could all work on being more patient and aspire towards Jesus' ultimate example of patience we see in the Gospels, because I think this is a quality where, we all have some degree or of another of room for growth, right? I know I certainly do. And if you don't believe me, my wife is here and she could tell you. She's in the lounge with my daughter. She could tell you I need to work on my patience a little bit, but yeah, we could all work on this. So how can we all be patient in everyday situations? Let's look. So first, listen without interrupting. This is a big one. Often we're so focused on what we want to say and the thoughts that we want to express and get out that sometimes we just steamroll over the other person, right? We don't even wait for them to stop talking. Yeah, what, and then you got 2 people that aren't, 2 people talking, no one listening, so there's really no actual communication going on. So, you may as well be speaking 2 different languages. There's not much. So, instead, let's try to listen intently to one another. Let's listen, what's on their mind, what's on their heart. Like, how can we help this person, with the problem that they're telling us about, or just telling us about their day? How can we engage them and, really show that we we care about how their day was. This is a great way. We try to have dinner at the dinner table every night. It's a good way of interacting. Sometimes it's the only way we can interact. And it gets harder as the kids get older. They get their activities and they're all going separate ways and everyone's got work schedules. But, there's that little time, whether it's the breakfast table, dinner, whatever, just find a time to talk to each other. Pause before reacting. Before we, like I said before we just fly off the handle or react emotionally, viscerally, just try to take a few deep breaths, say a quick prayer. The news you may be hearing may not be what you wanted to hear, but ask for God's help to react in a godly way that's productive to a stressful situation or to bad news or something that you may not want to hear. Remember, it's really hard to take back words that are said in the heat of the moment, right? They say it's like trying to stick toothpaste back into the tube after it doesn't work. So, just take a beat, pause before you fly off the handle. Remember, patience is the opposite of anger. Show understanding and empathy. We could all try to see things from other people's perspective, right? As the saying goes, before you judge someone, try walking a mile in their shoes. Kind of set aside the fact that we shouldn't be judging anyone, since Jesus the Christ will do that from his throne at the right hand of God at the end of the age. But, do try walking a mile in someone else's shoes, meaning try seeing things from their point of view. It's not, we can't be so self-centered. We have to remember that there is more than one point of view. Everyone's got an opinion. But sometimes if you show understanding and, see it from somebody else's point of view, you'd all be better off. We'd all be better off. Manage expectations. So, kind of accept that not everything is going to happen on your timeline. We live in a society of instant gratification, right? Amazon Prime, overnight shipping, one-day ship. Come on, no, I don't want it Tuesday. I want it tomorrow. I want it today. Grubhub, DoorDash, Uber Eats. They all let us get food delivered right to our house for only triple the price of what we'd pay if we picked it up ourselves. But God is not a DoorDash driver. We have to remember that God has a plan for our lives, and prayers will be answered in his time, not ours, but keep praying, Remember what we sang this morning. We wait for you, even so come. We wait for Jesus, and only God knows the time that he will return. What else can we do to be patient? Practice gratitude. We could try to focus on what's going well instead of getting frustrated by delays. When you're at the red light and it goes green and the person in front of you, they're not looking at the light. It's been 2 seconds already. You don't have to necessarily lay on the horn. Come on, let's go. The lights, I don't want to sit here any longer. I got places to go. But no, give them a hot, if it's been 10 seconds, okay. Now, but, maybe they were looking at their phone, but you've done it too. So, so let's have a little grace. And, but anyway, practice gratitude. I was going to say, in traffic, maybe traffic is at a dead stop. Maybe there was an accident, a fender bender, whatever, and it's backing up traffic. That's a moment for gratitude. You could say a prayer like, thank you, God, for keeping my car safe, my family's car safe, my kid's school bus safe, my kid's school. And, we often don't know if there's injuries or or anything in an accident if we can't see what's going on, but say a prayer for the people that may have been injured in this accident. It's not just an inconvenience for you. Somebody may have been really seriously injured or hurt. So, or say a prayer of gratitude, thanking God for the first responders. I mean, we're so fortunate to have people that rush into danger when most of us would be running the other way, and they're there in our hour of need. So, take those times where it might be, oh, this is holding me up, I got to get out of here, I got to get home, practice gratitude. We're going to be stuck in that traffic whether we're miserable or grateful, so be grateful. And lastly, offer help instead of criticism. Instead of getting annoyed, if something doesn't go your way, find ways to support others in their struggles. It's easy to see someone struggling, or maybe they mess something up, and you can say, well, you should have done it this way. Like, this is the right way to do it. Why'd you do it that way? That's not helpful. That's not constructive. And it tends to be the first place we go, but that's not very helpful. So instead, offer a helping hand. Ask, hey, what can I do to help? I find at work what the biggest thing to kind of diffuse the situation, if I'm like doing 6 things at once and I'm going every which way, if somebody says, what can I do to help? Whew, that kind of diffuses everything. Like, well, what can't you do? Take one of these 5 things off my plate. So, be a helper. Even if it costs you time or interferes with what you had planned. And, remember, it's God's plan that matters, so let's be patient. And that, in closing, I just want to say, that also means being patient with ourselves. A lot of us are overly critical of ourselves, and, oh my gosh, just the constant negative self-talk about, why am I like this? And I'm, nobody just, let's be patient with ourselves. We're all on a path of personal growth. So let's give ourselves a break, not be so hard on ourselves. Let's be patient with others and ourselves, because God doesn't want perfect, right? He wants progress. We're all going to fall short at one point or another, so let's have grace with ourselves and one another when that happens. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for your endless love and mercy. We come before you asking for the strength to be patient like Jesus. He showed patience with his disciples, with those who doubted him, and even in his suffering. Help us to follow his example, to respond with kindness instead of frustration, to wait with trust instead of anxiety, and to love others even when it's not so easy. When we feel impatient, remind us to rely on your perfect timing. Fill our hearts with peace, our minds with understanding, and our actions with grace. Teach us to slow down, listen, and serve with humility. We trust that you are working in all things, and we surrender our impatience to you. Thank you for your patience with us. In Jesus' name, amen.